Let me give you some background information. I'm 18 years old and I'm living in Dagenham. It's quite a busy area, so there's normally a lot of people around. This particular night, me and a friend, I'll call him Jim, were on our way to camp in a local park. You were never allowed in this park past 10 PM, so what we'd have to do is hide from the park police. The park we were staying at was always busy up until about 9 PM, then it turns to a ghost field. Anyway, back to the story. We had set out to the park at about 8:30, so by the time we got there wouldn't be anyone there to grass us up. We arrived and everything went according to plan. We had the tents, snacks, portable DVD player, Pokemon Go at the ready. It was perfect. 10 PM came and we heard the park police shutting up the gates. They're quite heavy, so it's always easy to hear the gates creak. Once we were sure the police had left, we decided to whip out our phones and play some Pokemon Go. There was a Pokestop in the park and I had a lure module to use. We had been playing for about half an hour when we heard a loud bang come from the gate, like someone had ran into it. Dagenham's known for its drunk, so we shook it off as nothing. Cut the long story short, we went back to the tent, watched a couple of action films and then went to sleep. Not even an hour into our sleep, I woke with a horrible sense of dread, like somebody was watching me. All of my senses were heightened, something just wasn't right. I hear some crunching coming from behind the tent. I thought it must have been a fox until I heard it, or should I say I heard them speak. I managed to make out the words, "They're gonna hear us, keep your damn mouth shut." I quietly, violently shook Jim to wake him up and told him what I had heard. I needed to make sure I wasn't crazy, so I made him listen. While listening, his face turned white. The fear spread across his face. He grabbed my arm hard and whispered, "We need to make a run for it. Just trust me." I didn't hesitate. We're quite athletic people, so running isn't really a problem. We slowly unzipped the tent and with one big breath made a mad dash for the gate. We heard pounding footsteps and heavy breathing behind us as a guy shouted in a horrible musky voice, "Oi, slow down, we just want to play with you." And both the guys started laughing madly, like seriously. It was some fucked up laugh. We made it to the fence and leapt over with ease. The rest was just a dash to my house, which was only around the corner. We made it back, slammed the door, ran up to my room and peeked out of the bedroom window. We saw both guys sprint past my house, both holding something metallic. It was hard to see as it was pitch black due to the street light being out. At that moment I turned to Jim and I asked him why he looked so terrified back in the tent. He then went on to explain what he heard the guys say. "You grab the small one, the large one's mine. The bigger they are, the bigger they challenge." That terrified me. We went back to our tent the next morning and found all of our stuff destroyed. Tent was slashed, portable DVD player was snapped in half, and all our food was thrown all over the place. We never told anyone. I think we were too proud to say that we ran away. All I know is I'm never going camping again. So this one might be a bit long, but I need to go into it slowly, so bear with me. Me and my boyfriend love to camp. About 2 weeks ago, we decided to go to the coast, because we had Friday off from classes in university and decided to hike and camp out for the weekend. We had a 3-day plan to stay in 3 different towns and hike to each place. This story isn't about the first place we stayed in. The first town was barely a town. It was more like a bunch of small houses and farmlands and very few people. It was off season, so normally there would be some tourists there, since the main attraction is a huge abandoned city left over from times of the ancient Greek civilization. Anyway, since there was 5 to 6 camping grounds available, one of which was highly recommended on TripAdvisor and the likes of, we didn't bother calling beforehand, we simply headed there and then straight to that camping area. Upon reaching it, we saw the gate open. Not really so unusual, but when we entered it, no one seemed to be there. We knocked and called out for someone and no one responded, except the outdoor bar was open with expensive bottles of alcohol lined up and food left on the kitchen table, as we saw from the window, so they couldn't have gone far. My boyfriend found it a bit strange that they would be leaving everything open like that, but assuming it was a small community with no crime, we didn't think any more. We went to some other camping grounds to ask if they were open. The first one we went to said that they were closed because their grounds were very messy these days and recommended we go to another place. We asked them about the first ground that we'd went into, and strangely, the man said don't go there. When we asked why, he just said, just don't. I don't really recommend you going there. Anyway, the other place he told us about was also closed, and luckily, in the meantime, I found a signboard for the first place and it had their number on it. We called them and a man picked up and told us that he and his wife, who run the place, are out for a couple of hours but will be back in the evening. He said we could set up our camp and that we could meet later. The place was a bit secluded, but it was quite picturesque, and we set up our camp and left. We spent the whole day exploring and hiking around, and after a tiring day around 10 PM after dinner started heading back. This is where things got extra creepy. When we got back, we found the place still empty. No one had returned and it was all quite late. My boyfriend called the owners again and they said that they had decided not to return tonight, but that we could leave the money under the table mat by the bar. They said the kitchen and the bathrooms are open if we needed to use them. The place was dark and the yard where we had set up the camp was huge and without lighting. My boyfriend immediately started to feel a bit uneasy. He was concerned why 2 business owners would leave their property completely open to 2 total strangers, with a bar full of unopened bottles and a half-open house. As we walked towards our camp, he kept gently expressing his uneasiness and kept looking around. He's usually pretty calm, so I told him if he's really feeling strongly about this, we can just go to the pension where we had dinner earlier and stay the night there in a hotel room. He opened the flashlight of his phone and kept looking around, getting more and more uneasy. We agreed to pack up camp and leave. I began to pack since it requires a lot of folding and he was already anxious. I told him to just stand there and give me light as I packed it up. Except constantly he would move the light and check the area, and I kept getting irritated because I could sense his worry, and at the same time I couldn't pack fast enough because I couldn't see. At one point he even told me in a slightly bitchy way to hurry it up, and as soon as I folded the camp, we stuffed it into the bag and hurriedly packed our shit and scooted. He still seemed super anxious and I told him to relax. Just telling this part gives me chills all over again. The road back to the main area of town was dark and lonely, and this is when he told me. There's something I wanted to say, but not while we were in the ground still. Well, what is it? I asked. He hesitated and then he didn't want to freak me out, but he was sure that he saw someone lurking in the dark behind the wooden cabins and behind the bathrooms twice. No one was supposed to be there except us. I got chills, but I still tried to rationalise, saying it's a farm and there's a lot of animals, maybe a cat moving around. But he was adamant it was a human figure, walking like a human would do and standing. That is why he kept checking and wanted to hurry up so much. And that's why he was telling me to hush up and keep my voice down. I almost had tears in my eyes at this point, and the hair on my back was standing. I kept looking back and almost running at this point to the lighted area of the quiet town, and only really relaxed when we reached the pension and booked a room there, got the key, locked and checked it twice. I'm generally a skeptical person, but I really do believe my boyfriend didn't just see things. I don't know who that was back there, or what could have happened, if anything, and I don't care to know. Dark and isolated places have always crept me out, but person lurking in the dark, let's never meet. This is just for reference. I was a 19-year-old female at the time, still female of course, just a little bit older. I love camping. Anytime my friends and I came home from college, we would load up our cooler with beer, grab some gear and go screw around outside. Unfortunately, when I was actually at school, none of my sorority sisters or other friends ever wanted to go with me, so I'd often suffer withdrawals from camping. One day the weather was way too nice to waste, so I grabbed some of my gear, hopped in a car I borrowed from a buddy and drove to a spot that was secluded, yet within safe distance to civilization that I could run and get help. Camping also creeps me out sometimes, but that creepy feeling is also somewhat of a plus for me. It's the same reason that people read these stories. It's fun to be scared. So I make a little camp and get a fire going. I hadn't brought all that much to eat, but I was enjoying myself reading and looking around the area, that sort of thing. I got the feeling that I was being watched and I stopped dead in my tracks. I hear a twig crunch over to the right of me, then see a deer bolt from 100 feet or so in front of me. I laughed at myself and went back to my camp with the armful of wood that I had gathered. I kept freaking myself out, hearing sounds just outside of the ring of light cast by the fire. I also get inside my head, so I shrugged it off and kept whittling at the stick that I had been messing with. Around 1, I decided to go into my tent and snuff out the lantern. I had been slamming beers in the most unladylike fashion and smoking cheap cigars. Another reason I like camping, I can act however I want, so I passed out relatively quick. About 2 o'clock in the morning, I hear footsteps. They sound pretty light and sort of timid. I think to myself that it's a deer or an animal, more like a raccoon, because I'd left some food out. I'm still on guard though. About 30 minutes of sleeping with one eye open, I hear a rubbing noise, and the tent fabric is being pushed in. I don't know how I didn't shit my sleeping bag, but I just sat there paralysed with my K-bar in my hand. I desperately wanted to thrust the knife through the tent fabric, but I was still holding out hope that it was some of my buddies from a frat joking with me. And then, as suddenly as it all began, it all stopped. I was starting to feel slightly more secure because daylight would be coming in about 2 or 3 hours, but I sure as shit wasn't going to sleep. All of a sudden, at about 4 o'clock, I realised I should put some boots on so that if anything did happen, I would be ready. After having stayed up and keeping alert a little while longer, my friend's car alarm goes blaring. I freak the fuck out and run out of the tent. I got about 2 steps before the car before something grabs me around the mouth. I open my mouth to scream, but instead the person's pinky finger slips between my teeth. I've heard that people can perform superhuman features when they have huge adrenaline rushes. In my case, I just clamped down, and there's no way to say this without sounding ridiculous. His finger popped off. He screamed, pulled his hand away with the missing digit falling to the ground. I must have looked ridiculous to the people whose house I ran to. A little sorority girl in a wife beater, boxers and steel-toe boots. I also had some blood that oozed out of my lip, but not from the finger, but because I also managed to take a pretty good chunk out of my lip as well. I told them what happened and they called the police, got me some real clothing, and the man at the house made me a whiskey and coke. The cops arrived and they went to check out the scene, and when they came back it was light out. They brought me back so I could get my friend's car, and what I saw just made me more scared. Right next to the tent was a red gas can. He could have just lit me on fire earlier. The finger was also gone, suggesting he had come back. The reality is, they never caught the guy, so somewhere out there is a man sitting down to dinner, maybe alone, maybe with a wife and a couple of kids, and he's missing his right pinky.